Policy 6010, School Attendance Area Report. We have to do this tonight because this sets off a series of events that have to happen, since we're going to have to look at school attendance areas to open up elementary school 42 next year.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Kamen, and with me tonight is Jennifer Babanco. She's also staff in the school planning office. She helped me co-chair Policy 6010. We're here today to present the committee's recommended changes for Policy 6010, which is the school attendance areas. The proposed school attendance area policy includes when the board should consider redistricting, how the attendance area plans are tested and assessed, and the process and responsibilities of those involved with attendance area adjustments. This policy review is out of sequence. Typically, policies are reviewed every 6 years. It would actually have been up for review next year, but since we are opening an elementary school next year, it was decided that we should review the policy before we redistrict and not have both going on at the same time. The outcome of the policy changes will immediately go in effect January 2017 and directly impact the process to the attendance area adjustments to open elementary school 42.
Each of the goals in the strategic plan are relevant to Policy 6010. A few of the goals that are pertinent include physical spaces configured to facilitate learning, providing timely, relevant, and easily accessible information, tailored communication to meet user needs, and regularly considering research-based best practices.
This is an overview and timing of our planning process. Planning staff want to take a step backwards before we actually dive into the policy so that we can show the implications of the policy relative to our work and all of the products that come out of our office. In a year without redistricting, or actually any year, we start with enrollment projections in January. We're actually undergoing that process right now. And enrollment projections are produced by studying our cohort survival at each school by each grade. Enrollment projections take into account grade survival ratios, resales, new housing, birth rates, apartment turnovers, to name a few. Once the previous year's projections are assessed and new projections are developed, the Office of School Planning moves into reviewing each school's growth pattern and presents them as well as mitigation strategies in our feasibility study. The feasibility study is basis for our capital planning and budget, which is first published in September and then approved the following May of each year. School planning then submits an open and closed school chart, which everyone knows for adequate public facilities for Howard County. Study, if redistricting process is initiated, the attendance area is conformed, and that's the yellowish orange on your screen that you see. We typically try to get that out in the springtime, and then we do our regional meetings, we set our goals, we do our regional meetings, and we have the public process starting in the fall of the year. Excuse me. Every year, we work closely with the Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning to review the housing allocations and permits given, which feeds part of our projection model. Housing in Howard County is planned through Plan Howard 2030, and that's the map that you see on your screen. The map is the designated place type map, which is the Howard County's general plan. The plan guides residential and commercial redevelopment or development for the next 20 years. The growth and revitalization areas are shown in pink, and coincidentally, that is where we're seeing most of our growth when we do our enrollment. Residential growth drives our enrollment growth, and enrollment growth drives our capital plan. It's important to know that Hcpss does not determine the land use goals of the county. Rather, the decision lies with council through the public participation process. I would like to emphasize that decisions made during the comprehensive plan and shown in the land use patterns adopted within Plan Howard 2030 is a key driver for our growth and development. We project student enrollment and work to accommodate the students as they arrive. We see the effect of new development in our enrollment trends. Enrollment growth is also due in part of turnover of existing homes from families who have aged out of the system to younger families with students, and we see that in the Turf Valley, which is in the northern areas, Maple Lawn, which is in the south, and along the Route 1 corridor. Just as a side note, County Council recently approved an additional 744 affordable units in downtown, so that brings the total anticipated units in downtown Columbia up to over 6,200. And we also anticipate 4,000 new units in the Route 1 corridor and about 2,000 new units in the Turf Valley area. We do caution that in the land use and zoning regulations for residential development actually change over time. So prior to and when some western schools were expanded, we projected more growth in the west, so we planned and built for it. After the seats were built, the regulations changed and growth areas were revised and moved to the east. You'll see a heavy black line on the map, and that basically determines where the infrastructure already is, and that's where the concentrated growth is now with this current comprehensive plan. There we go. System-wide enrollment growth is projected to steadily increase. This slide shows that this enrollment growth chart you see does not include pre-kindergarten growth, which has grown 54% between 2005 and 2015. Our enrollment projections are extremely accurate, which allows us to see new capacity needs for our facilities. The board requests CIP funds when needed, but does not control the funding sources. And so it must be strategic when prioritizing our capital and renovation needs. We do have some strategies to manage growth. We reassess our existing school spaces and evaluate room sizes and capacity calculations for existing facilities. We evaluate Howard County and Howard County Public Schools and Howard County regional programs. We do utilize relocatables in some instances as temporary relief to the growing school populations. And every June, these recommendations, these strategies to manage our growth comes out in our feasibility study, which is kind of like the state of the schools, where we are, where we anticipate them growing, and what kind of needs we as a school system need in the future. This is an overview of our capital funding. Despite the increasing enrollment growth trend, we have declining local fundings of our capital budget.
Surprise. Keeping
in mind these trends span multiple administrations, in this chart, the blue bars represent the county funding and the orange represent the state funding. In fiscal year 2006, we received $15 million in state funds, and in fiscal year 17, we received $33 million. Just on the contrary, for the county funding, in fiscal year 2006, we received $71 in local money, but that has decreased to $44 million in fiscal 17. You can see in some years the county was lower, and we were fortunate to get state funding, but we also caution that state funding is the ability for us to have qualifying projects. So in some years, state funding will fluctuate. And state funding will make up less than the capital budget due to require matching funds from the local government. Oops, sorry about that. We want to make a distinction between the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, which is a county law, and that determines whether a developer can receive his housing allocations for new residential development, and that has a different trigger than our redistricting policy, which is lower than that. The APFO actually delays a housing unit allocation for up to 4 years. Theoretically, it's to allow the school system to catch up and build that capacity project if needed. If a developer fails the test 4 times, and then they automatically will receive their housing unit allocation. And we wanted to let everyone know that there are recommendations being considered by the county executive. It has not been released. There was a APFO task force. The recommendations are being considered right now by the county executive. Policy 6010, on the other hand, prompts consideration of redistricting prior to a school closing to residential development. There is a distinction. A lot of folks see Apfo and Policy 6010, but they're two completely different things, and they have different triggers and different meanings.
So we chartered Policy 6010 Review Committee on June the 23rd, and the committee had 9 meetings with in-depth discussion on the policy details. The committee's proposal was reviewed by the policy specialist, legal team, and cabinet, so we're going to go ahead and get started on the work that was done over the last 5 months. So Policy 6010 Review Committee was diverse. It included representation from Hcpss staff as well as citizens from across the county, from Savage to Elk Ridge and Western Howard County to Oakland Mills. So we also included members from the board's Community Advisory Council as well as Hcpss and others noted in the board report as well. The group concurred on the majority of the recommended changes. We do have 3 minority opinions, which we'll go over as we review the presentation here. And the presentation is a committee recommendation for the board's review. We as staff are facilitating the policy review process, and we're here to provide relevant information to inform you in your decision-making process.
Okay. The committee recommended policy statement focuses on 3 main ideas: equitable education opportunities, balanced capacity utilization for all schools, and recognizing the value of diverse and inclusive school populations. There was a minority opinion on the policy statement seeking more specific language with regards to socioeconomic balance of every school student body, because 2 of the committee members believe that diverse and inclusive needed to be defined in terms of only socioeconomic diversity. However, the majority of the committee stakeholders believe that defining diverse and inclusive only in terms of socioeconomic conditions was too narrowly focused and specific, and the committee actually defined diverse and inclusive within the policy, which includes race, ethnicity, and the socioeconomic condition.
So these are the added definitions for the policy to align with the proposed policy as well as other Hcpss policies. I'd like to focus on 2 definitions on this list. One is utilization, which is the comparison of a school's program capacity to its enrollment or projected enrollment. And also on this list is target utilization, which is a range, and replace the terms maximum target enrollment and minimum target enrollment. These are the 2 lists of updated definitions and deleted definitions. You'll see maximum and minimum target enrollment were removed here and replaced with, like I said, replaced with target utilization. The definition, though, keeps the same recommended 90 to 110% utilization, which is what is in the current policy. When you look to standard section A, if a school's utilization is outside the range defined in the target utilization, then the board will consider redistricting. There was a strongly held minority opinion in the committee to lower this range to 85 to 105%. The lower range was suggested in order to prompt the board to consider redistricting earlier, encouraging a more proactive response to growth in the county. However, the majority of the committee members determined that maintaining the current range of 90 to 110% was the best fit. And some of those reasons for that include that the current program capacity calculation are adjusted to be less than 100% utilization of the building. Also, a lower range of utilization may give the impression of more redistricting more often or completion of capacity projects earlier. The range is used to prompt considering redistricting, not necessarily action, and capital funding isn't driven or determined by the policy, so it was thought that maybe that would cause confusion. Also, the policy doesn't prohibit redistricting schools if the capacity utilization is within the range. So if the board wants to do a redistricting to a school that is 105% and the range remains the same at 90 to 110, then there's nothing prohibiting that. It was also noted that the lowering the range would disproportionately advantage schools that are between 85 and 90%, because those schools would be less likely to be considered for receiving additional students since they would be inside that range. In standards section B, after we just reviewed one of the reasons that the board is prompted to consider redistricting. Standard section B looks at the conditions considered when creating an attendance area plan. So these are the factors that are used to measure the effect of a plan. Currently, there's a list of 11 considerations when developing a plan. The committee proposed to make all the criteria measurable and group the criteria into the 3 categories that you see here on the screen. The committee wanted to focus on goals for long-term stability and fiscal responsibility. Here on the slide, we have a couple of the new highlights that we'll look at that are additional criteria and different from the current policy. Under facility utilization, the redistricting plans should result in a capacity utilization between 90 and 100% for as long as possible to avoid frequent redistricting. Also, proposals to move regional programs should not cluster those regional programs into one area of the county for equitable access for all students. Under community stability, consider keeping areas that are made up of contiguous communities or neighborhoods together. Under demographic characteristics, consideration for racial and ethnic composition of the student body and enrollment in ESOL program. Also, relating the number of students moved with the outcomes and the length of times those outcomes are expected to maintain. In previous planning, a large number of students moved was typically considered a negative, but in this case, if a plan is a larger number of students but also meets more of the criteria, it could be considered positive. And also, when applicable, other reliable demographic indicators. So here's one of the standards listed in section B. For each criterion in section B, the committee discussed ways to review and assess the data. This did include socioeconomic composition in the demographic characteristics section. There was a majority consensus noted on the slide here, and there was also a minority opinion. The members who believe that adding arranged, as noted in the minority opinion on the screen here, they believe that adding the range would avoid ambiguity and not worsen conditions. The majority of the group had concerns with the range, including that the range might imply priority over other criteria in standard section B, that it might be negative and not promote diverse and inclusive schools, or that it might be difficult to balance with other factors, including the potential to create longer bus rides and divide communities. This is standard section C and D. There's a few highlights that we wanted to mention here. First, that the board will provide public notice on whether or not it would proceed with redistricting. Second is in prior attendance area adjustment processes, the board has discussed allowing some students to remain at schools after redistricting, for example, rising 5th, 8th, 11th, or 12th graders. The committee didn't propose to allow or not allow that. They just proposed to list in the policy that the discussion could be considered and happen during the process. This wasn't previously identified in the policy. And third, during an extended emergency, the superintendent can propose redistricting plans as needed. And then in the responsibilities and references section, most of the language was just updated to clarify and align with other policies and best practices. And we also noted that the Attendance Area Committee complies with the Maryland Open Meetings Act.
There were several changes to the implementation procedures recommended by the committee, including adding a section for all of our definitions. If they are already defined in our policy, we didn't redefine them in the implementation, but we did add a definition for integrated modular units, projection methodology, and relocatables. One significant change was to provide a timeline for our long-range facilities. So you remember the order of everything in the beginning of my presentation that says this is how we do things. Previously in the implementation procedures, that timeline was broken up based on who does what, but not when. And so the order was taken out in the order was out of order in the implementation procedure. So one of the recommendations from the committee was to actually order it the way it happens and then identify who is doing what and what that step actually was. The third thing the implementation procedures does is it specifies the composition of the attendance area committee memberships and the responsibilities. It actually adds up to 3 more members for the regional areas. It defines their process and their guidelines, how staff will interact with them. And it specifically notes that the AAC will be chartered by the Board of Education. This is our policy timeline. We're right now at December 5th with our report. There's a public hearing on January 12th for this policy with action on January 26th with an effective date also on January 26th. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Anybody? This is Delmont-Small.
This will be unusually quick. I have a bunch of little questions regarding it. If that's okay, I will share with the group and send it to you guys.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to do that. And the other thing I wanted to make sure that I said is that the committee really, you can tell that they really, really thought this through. And the way that you did the presentation with the PowerPoint, the format I found very easy to follow as far as with the minority opinion and such. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when you send the questions, do you want us to bring them back at public hearing time or action when you have your discussion on the policy after? How would you like that?
If it works
Sooner the better, no?
Yeah,
Chair.
sooner
Better?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do it that
I just
way.
want to make sure.
Yeah,
thank
a
you.
written response, and then we'll, when we have our conversation with the action item, yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Ellis?
I'm really glad to see, that the AAC will be appointed by the board. And to that extent, I would like to see that we have members of HCEA on the AAC, on that committee. I think that educators should be involved when they're looking at attendance areas, definitions, because I think they have a lot of information that could be put into that use. I know we're looking at having students. I think we should have educators as well on that committee.
Sure. And just as a side note, we actually solicit very heavily in the springtime for members. There's an interview process that we actually have done over the last several redistricting. So we do push out to get a lot of involvement all over the county with specific groups.
Ms. French?
The board has approved a process and the composition of the AAC. The name has been changed several times, usually when there's a new director. So Renee, if you want to come up with a new name for the committee.
I think we're good. Everyone's familiar with that one.
Yeah. But that is subject to the policy of advisory committees to the Board of Education. And so because of that, it has to be in the policy section, not in the implementation procedure. Just lift it up and move it over.
It's not optional.
And my
Okay.
other question was, has this policy draft been reviewed by
Legal.
legal services?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was it, I'm blanking on his name, Andy?
Yes.
It was Andy, okay, good.
I have a follow-up question for Ms. Ellis's question. If HCEA people are on the committee, would they have to also be Howard County residents?
Yes, absolutely.
So FYI.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Okay.